Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Let's talk about voting today. A lot of Muslims are very confused of what voting is and if they should take part in it or not. Is it haram? Is it an act of kufr? Is it nifaq? Or should we just simply get involved and ignore all of those elements that scholars have talked about? So in this short video, we want to highlight some key points for you to consider. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, I hope by the end of this video, you'll have some direction of what your decision should be with respect to voting. Number one, there are several opinions that voting is haram. And they use verses that are found in Surah Al-Ma'idah, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ. And then there are three verses that start off the same way but end differently. One of them says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ فَاسِقُونَ and ظَالِمُونَ. Whoever does not judge in accordance to what Allah has sent down, meaning the Quran and in the Sunnah or the Sharia in general, then this person has either committed an act of kufr, or this person is a zalim, they have transgressed and sinned, or this person is a fasiq, this is a person who's just out there to bring corruption to the land. And no doubt, brothers and sisters, that if you don't judge a situation by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from you, then certainly you get yourself into problem. Here's the issue with that, or the struggle with an opinion like that. No one can argue that this opinion is wrong or it's haram. No one can say to you that, look, this is not applicable to our times and our situation. Rather, brothers and sisters, you want to understand why that fatwa even exists in the first place and how to apply it, whether it's in this situation or in another. So let's put things into perspective, and this is how you're going to understand the other opinions that say, well, this doesn't apply, you can vote, get involved because it's the greater good of this ummah. Today, there is absolutely no doubt that Muslims are under the microscope. We are being talked about in every news outlet, every newspaper, every political stage. Something about Muslims are being talked about. And most of the time, and I really don't know why, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us strength, most of the time it's always negative. A lot of it is untrue, but somehow at the end of the day, all the Muslims around the world are being painted with the same brush, that we fall under all of these extreme categories. May Allah protect us from that. Now, coming back to this whole voting issue, there are elections happening here in Canada and in North America, and wherever you are in the world, if elections are happening, these are some points to consider. Voting is nothing more than just choosing or considering an option. And a lot of the students who say that this is all haram, they argue the fact that you're voting or you're choosing an option within a kufr system. So I want to paint a picture for you to consider what this kufr democracy looks like and where you stand within that picture. Imagine you had two parties. One party says that we are going to run for election, but we're going to legalize pornography, we're going to legalize crime and marijuana. And in addition to that, we're also going to legalize the scrutiny and maybe the persecution of Muslims in general all over our country. The next party that's running against them says, well, we're going to legalize crime, pornography, and alcohol and other things, but you see this persecution business with the Muslims, we're going to eliminate that completely. We don't want any of that, not only for the Muslims, but for no genders or no religions anywhere in our country. So both of them are running for this election. Now, you as a Muslim, what do? You're obviously, if you were going to vote, you're going to vote for the latter party. But then you argue that you're participating in a kufr system. Guess what's going to happen if you sit back and do nothing? There's a 50-50 chance that one or the other is going to come in power. And if you decide to do nothing, then in actuality, your abstinence from voting is actually a vote. You're basically saying, I don't want to have nothing to do with this. That's my choice. So as a result, one of these parties ends up winning, and most likely it could be the first party, and here you are, you're affected by that vote, you're affected by that election, your children are, and this is the problem. Now you start seeing stories and you hear on the news, a niqabi was attacked at a mall, this Muslim was attacked or being spat on or discriminated in the workplace or at school. All of these things sprout out because of that kind of propaganda. And what did you do to change that? You decided to do nothing. Now that's a huge problem. If you had voted, you would have voted for the latter, and if more Muslims took on that same mentality, then inshallah, the latter would have won the election. But it still doesn't ignore the fact that both parties are going to legalize things that are haram. Here's one point that I want you to remember. Voting is not about you and you alone. It's about the greater good of the Muslims and the Ummah in general. If you start paying attention to policies, then it becomes an individual thing. It's all about you. You don't like marijuana, or you don't like pornography and things like that, so you don't want to vote for that. That's great for you as an individual. But what about the Ummah as a whole? Just think about what you see on TV and how the Muslims are being talked about all over the world. Do something that can at least have an effect for the rest of your brothers and sisters around the world. Stop thinking about you and yourself and think about all of them. So in actuality, at the end of the day, just because you participate in a kufr system doesn't necessarily mean you are actually falling into the state of kufr. Think about it. So that's a serious statement to make, because if you're going to vote for the latter, then at least at the end of the day, the situation for the Muslims could become that easier. Another point that others have argued with respect to why voting is impermissible is they say that the Muslim identity is always at risk, because there's certain policies that can change the way you think and the way you feel about your Muslim identity. I have a big problem with this. Because if a simple check mark on a piece of paper really compromises your identity as a believer, then guess what? Voting is not your only problem in your life. You have other issues that you need to focus on. So stop blaming everything on one thing and start looking at how often you pray Fajr on time. What's your relationship like with your family, with your parents, with your spouse? Are you giving them all their rights? What's your involvement in your own communities? What have you been doing to better yourself as an individual? Then you can look at where voting fits in and all of that. And when you do that, when you're really critical with yourself, then you realize voting has nothing to do with my identity. I don't feel any different. It's just a check mark at the end of the day, and I can walk away. So really think about how much of an effect it's going to happen to you. And if it really does affect you, you have other problems to deal with, not just this. The last and the final point that I want to mention and leave you with, brothers and sisters, is I do realize that the majority of the fatwa, and believe me, I've read as many of them as I could possibly find, they say that voting is haram. But just think about it at the end of the day. These are fatwa. These are opinions from respected scholars of Islam. But at the end of the day, they're not actual legislation. It's not something engraved in stone. We need to really reassess our situation and look at what the greater good of the Muslim Ummah is going to be. If you sit back and do nothing, you're actually creating greater harm for our brothers and sisters at the end of the day. Because one day, when you turn on the TV and you hear that a hijabi was attacked just because of her hijab, that could be your daughter. So what are you going to do then? It could be your mother. What are you going to do then? You're going to regret that at least you didn't have one say. At least you didn't take part and try to stop that kind of discrimination from happening. So abstinence from voting is actually creating a bigger problem in this day and age. And this is why I think that at this point we need to really rethink and review what our opinion is with respect to this topic. Now we have reached a stage in the political world where we need to get involved, at least in the political process. Look around at how many Muslims are actually involved in their communities. Like, I'm talking about the broader community, involved in the hospitals, being part of the political process, volunteering, giving back. Just think about that situation and how much that lack of involvement is actually hurting us as an ummah. So at the end of the day, brothers and sisters, I leave you with these thoughts just for you to think about. And if voting is happening for you right now, elections are around the corner right now, honestly, brothers and sisters, look at the situation of the Muslims in your locality, in your country, and do what is best for yourself, for your children, and for the overall Muslim community wherever you live. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this from me and accept this from all of you. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive me for whatever mistakes I say or have done, especially at this time. Allahumma ameen. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.